Okay, start over again. I'm sorry. This has to be recorded so that people who can't make it tonight can watch it tomorrow. We're following this philosophy that we want to encourage people to come, and it worked out very well here. And so it's only being made available now in person. Tomorrow it'll be available for people to see on YouTube, but they can't ask questions. So that's the penalty for doing it that way. Anyway, this is the book by Jim Rosebrock, and it's on artillery. That's a focus of his interest, really. As I mentioned, he is one who works at Antietam as a host, and I was very interested in looking as I looked at the book and some of the problems they must have had with artillery. We're talking about very heavy pieces of machinery with cannons and horses that are pulling this equipment require hay and water. And also there's food for the soldiers. In fact, I saw in this book that there's roughly one horse for every soldier to take care of that supply. It's a big process. Anyway, why don't we let Jim talk? That's what we're interested in, what I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Alvin. So we're going to switch over to the presentation. A little bit more about myself. I was in the Army 28 years, retired in 2004. That's a long time ago. Got a job with the Department of Justice and retired from that job about 3 years ago. Since then, I've been able to really focus on what I want to study and learn about, and that is at a big level, the Battle of Antietam, but at a more focused level is the artillery. I had an ancestor at Antietam who was an artillery soldier. He was from a battery from New York, Buffalo, New York. That's where I'm from originally. That battery fought at Antietam. I had a great uncle in World War I, 35th Field Artillery Regiment. My father was in a field artillery in World War II, and my nephew was in the Marine Corps as an artillery soldier. So there's a lot of artillery in our family. So if we can get the PowerPoint running up there, that'd be good. So I call this Artillery 101, okay? If you've ever been to college or high school or whatever, you know that the 101 level course is what? Entry level stuff. But it's going to give you some interesting information about artillery in the Civil War. And there are specifically, we'll wait till the slides power up here for me to continue. There it is. First of all, can you all hear me?
Yes.
That? Okay, great. So this is actually a photo I took at Antietam on the battlefield. Who has been to Antietam? Who's visited it before? Okay, so most of you have been out there. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to come out. I volunteer on Fridays, so look me up if you're out there on a Friday. And I also am a battlefield guide, so I give guided tours to groups that are interested in doing that. There are 3 combat arms in the Civil War. There's infantry, which is what the guys carrying the muskets. There's cavalry, the guys on horseback that do the scouting and that. And then the last one is artillery. And if I can get the next slide, please. This is an artillery officer that fought at Antietam. His name is Captain Albert Monroe. He's from Rhode Island. And after the war, he sort of had a big complaint that nobody took the artillery very seriously. And this is a quote of his. He says, the value of the light artillery in the Army as a factor in suppressing the rebellion has never been accorded that credit to which it's entitled. So one of the reasons I wrote that book is to give the artillery some credit to which they're entitled, because they played a significant role, not only at Antietam, but anywhere you go in the Civil War, they made a major role. So that's really what this is all about. It's telling the story of the artillery soldier in the Civil War. We could get our next slide out. So I'm going to break this talk up into 4 pieces, 4 bite-sized pieces here. We're going to talk about the men in the organization first, or we're going to talk about them in here. The men, the organization is the artillery battery. Any field artillery guys out here? veterans, okay? If you're in the military, if you're in the Army or the Marine Corps, the company is the basic fighting level. In the artillery specifically, you would call a company a battery, okay? So the battery and the men in the organization is one of the things we'll talk about here. What do you need to make the artillery work? You need the men, you need the guns and the equipment, right? You need the ammunition, and you need the horses. And the most underappreciated element of an artillery battery are those horses. Those are your prime movers, you know. In World War II or the modern era, it's deuce and a half trucks or gamma goats or tracked vehicles hauling these guns around. But in the Civil War, it's those horses. And they are poorly served in history in terms of the importance that those horses make. Next slide. So let's talk about some terminology. Let's all get on the same page here. And the first thing we want to talk about is that what I'm focusing on is light artillery. You may look at those guns and say, what's light about that? It weighs 2 tons. But that is opposed to other kinds of artillery, which we'll get to in a second. So light artillery or field artillery maneuver with the troops in the field. So if there's guys dragging cannons along behind the infantry marching along, those are field artillery or light artillery. Those two terms are synonymous, okay? But within that community, there are 2 types of light artillery. There's the horse artillery, and in a horse artillery battery, every artilleryman has a horse, okay? That means that they can keep up with the cavalry, and that is where every cavalry trooper has a horse. So if you want to move fast and you want to bring artillery with you, then you need to have a horse artillery unit, okay? Now those horse artillery units, Alan referenced this, have a lot more horses. They have a lot more horses than a mounted artillery unit. The vast majority of the artillery units in the Civil War are mounted artillery. And mounted artillery is basically, they maneuver with the infantry, okay? So the horse artillery maneuvers with the cavalry. We know about the cavalry guys on horseback. The mounted artillery maneuvers with the infantry, okay? The cannoneers don't have horses, they walk. So what does that mean? They're a lot slower moving organization than those light artillery or those horse artillery. So that's light artillery, that's what I'm focusing on, but there's also heavy artillery. And if you know about the Battle of Fort Sumter, you know about all those big fortifications on the coast, those are heavy artillery units, okay? We won't be getting much into them today. The bottom box there is the battery, that's the tactical unit. So in the infantry, it's a company. In the cavalry, it's a troop, cavalry troop, infantry company. In the artillery, it's a battery. But they're the same in a way because they're commanded by a lieutenant or a captain. They got about 100 men, give or take. That is the fighting unit of artillery, the artillery battery. That term was first used beginning of the Civil War. Before that, they didn't call them batteries. They called them light artillery. Because the U.S. Army didn't have very many of them before the Civil War. Next slide. Okay, so that is guns and equipment. That's the first thing we're going to cover. And if you wouldn't mind, Alan, one more return on that. So we're going to make it real easy for you tonight to understand artillery. There's 2 kinds. There are smooth bores on the left. When you go out to a battlefield, the guns that are green are smooth bores. They're made of copper. And when they've been out in the field for 160 years, what happens to copper? It's not the golden color like the Statue of Liberty was when she came over from France, right? She's green now. So are the smooth bores. They're made out of bronze, okay? They are smooth on the inside, okay? If you rub your fingers around inside there, they are smooth bores. They are bigger mouths on them. They throw a lot more lead than the rifles. The rifles are black. They're made out of iron. 2 different kinds of iron, okay? And they have rifling in them, okay? So they tend to also be a smaller gun, smaller diameter gun, okay? There's a smooth bore. If I drop it on the ground, it's not going to blow up and kill us all. Don't worry about that, okay? Y'all didn't appreciate that one, did you? This would have been fired out of this, okay? That's the smoothbore guns would have a powder bag attached. We'll explain all this in a minute. And they would be fired from a bronze gun. It's like throwing a softball or throwing a football. Okay. Iron guns have a round that looks like this. Okay. Most of the time you think about rounds, bullets or things, you think of something like this. The rifle round is like throwing a football, because the rifling inside that cannon will do what? It causes the round to spin. Okay, so that's going to give it a longer range. It's going to be more of an accurate kind of a weapon. But the downside is what? It's smaller, isn't it? It's smaller in diameter. Okay, it is good for hunting and killing the other guy's cannons. Okay, that's what rifles are for. Smoothbores are for hunting and killing the other guy's infantry. Okay, because these things can, I'll explain all that in a minute. So now you all know there's two kinds of cannons, right? Rifled cannons, flat, made out of iron, and smoothbore cannons, bronze, bigger usually, that you will see on the battlefields out here. Okay. Next slide. So let's talk about some of the different kind of cannons that you would find. And I'm using Antietam as my example because that's kind of the battle that I'm most familiar with. So in the rifled kind of cannons, one of the rifled kind of cannons is a 3-inch ordnance rifle, okay? And these are at Antietam. You can go out to Antietam on the battlefield and see these things. They weigh, that cannon weighs 1,720 pounds. And you might say, my gosh, that's big. But you ain't seen nothing yet. Wait till we get to some of these other cannons. It fires, it says a weight of the round, it fires about a 10-pound round, like the one I just showed you here. The rifles are smaller in diameter, okay? And this is the range that they have at different elevations. So at 5 degrees elevation, this thing can hit a target 1,900 yards away, okay? If you raise the elevation to 10 degrees, it can reach a target 2,900 yards away. And if you crank it up to 15 degrees, 4,200 yards away. That's 12,000 feet, give or take. That's 2.5 miles. These old Civil War guns could reach out and touch, couldn't they? Muzzle velocity, how fast they go, is 1,215 miles per second. Now, this is a favorite gun. You know why? It doesn't blow up on you. If you're an artilleryman, do you want your cannon going off and blowing up on you? This is made out of wrought iron, so it's a very modern metallurgy process to make these cannons, okay? And so this is something that is very much appreciated or favored by artillerymen. It's also very lightweight compared to the others. This is the cannon that the cavalry likes to drag along with it because it's the lightest weighing cannon. You don't want to tire your horses out with a Napoleon or a 20-pound parrot or something like that. So this is a favorite round, a favorite cannon at the cavalry level. Now the numbers up top, 87-44. 87 is at Antietam is how many of these the U.S. Army had. Okay, 44 is how many of these that the Confederates had. Now the Confederates couldn't build these things. They didn't have the labs or the armories to build them. So those 44 cannons the Confederates got, they captured from us. Okay, they captured a whole bunch of American U.S. Army artillery pieces. 44 of them, in fact, here at Antietam. It is an excellent round. It's an excellent round. All right, let's see another rifled gun, Alan, if we would. 10-pound Parrot. 10-pound Parrot is almost identical to that 3-inch ordnance rifle. The difference is it's the metallurgy, how it's made. This one will blow up on you. Okay, it's made of cast iron. So cast iron is much more brittle. Okay, so why is the U.S. Army buying these guns that blows up? They're cheap. They don't cost a lot of money. You'll see that in a minute. So when you're in a rush and you need a whole bunch of cannons at the beginning of the Civil War, are you going to buy wrought iron 3-inch ordnance rifles that are going to take longer and cost more, or are you going to buy these things? Okay. And some things have never changed, have they? In the military when it comes to buying stuff. Yes, sir.
How often do they explode?
What's that?
How often do they explode?
Enough to make guys very nervous. Now, there's not a statistic on that, but these things would could explode. And the way you tell the difference between this one and the previous one is, you see that wrought iron band at the back of it? There's a little wrap around the back there. That was built into the cannon to help prevent explosions. Because that's where the biggest force of dynamics are, is right there back in the rear of the cannon. But all the other statistics are pretty similar, okay? US had 53 of those here. We're starting to phase them out by the second year of the war, okay? Confederates are making these down in Richmond, so they can manufacture these cannons. It's a simpler technology to build these things, okay? Let's see what's next. Let's go to the next slide. So now we have the big brother of the 10-pound parrot. That's a 20-pound parrot, okay? And that thing weighs nearly 3,000 pounds. Now remember, you got 6 horses dragging this cannon around. Whether it's a 1,700-pound cannon or a 3,000-pound cannon, you only got 6 horses to pull it, you know? So think of how you're wearing out these horses, okay? This fires a big round, 20 pounds. Board hammer is a little smaller. Muzzle, we don't worry about the muzzle velocity in that, but this particular cannon was the one at Antietam that did a lot of damage to the Confederates, okay? This wasn't even on the same side of the creek as the rest of the Army. The Army's fighting on the west bank of the Antietam. These guys were on the east bank, and they are reaching out and hitting the Confederates very effectively. If you have been to the visitor center lately, since they remodeled it, when you walk in the door, you'll see a picture of the Dunker Church, and next to it is lined up as a bunch of artillerymen, Confederates that have been killed by artillery fire, most likely from these guns here. They're called the guns of position, okay? But they are big boys. They weigh nearly 3,000 pounds. At Antietam, 2 of them blew up. Okay, 2 of them blew up, and the Army Chief of Artillery says, "Let's pull these things off the inventory. We're not going to keep them in the inventory anymore." I mean, on one day, if 2 guns blow up out of 22, what's that? Do the math on that. That's 10% of your 20-pound parrots blew up today. So the Army's going to try to phase those out too. Okay. All right, let's switch to, yes, sir.
One of these blows up, how many men get blown up with it?
Well, if the gun crew is real close, you can probably lose 6 guys. Okay, if it really was a full involved blast, there's 6 guys working around that cannon. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Next one.
This next slide. Now this is another favorite. This is a smoothbore. This is a Napoleon. Okay, it's called an 1857 light gun howitzer. Where the 3-inch ordnance rifle was your preferred rifle gun, this is your preferred smoothbore gun. These don't blow up either. They're made out of bronze. This is top-notch stuff. This is a design that the U.S. Army brought over from France in 1857. It was the top-notch French artillery piece named after the Emperor Napoleon III, who was an artilleryman before he became Emperor of France, okay? This thing, look how much it weighs, 2,300 pounds, fires a 12-pound shot, big mouth on it, 4.6-inch diameter on it. That's one of these. That's a Napoleon, or that's a Napoleon round, okay? And they don't go out, notice they don't go out as far as the rifle ones, but they throw a heck of a charge, okay? And if you're infantry attacking a Napoleon battery, you better watch it. You better watch it, okay? So there's a lot of Napoleons on the U.S. Army side. There are 119 Napoleons at Antietam. That's a lot of guns. Confederates only have 24, okay? The Confederates have to substitute something else for Napoleons because they don't have enough of them yet. So they are going to be reaching into the old armories all around the South where the guns from the Mexican War are still gathering dust or gathering cobwebs, and they're going to pull out artillery that was used in the Mexican War, bronze guns in the Mexican War. They're going to fight here at Antietam, and we're going to see some of those next. If you could hit the next slide. Okay, model 1841. What does that tell you? That thing's been around before the Mexican War. That's a 6-pound gun. Okay, in every other way, it's like a Napoleon, but it's a smaller gun. It fires a 6-pound round, and the range is a lot short, a little bit shorter, okay? Robert E. Lee's got a bunch of those, look at that. He's got 59 of those. US Army doesn't have any of them. Because what? We've been making Napoleons. If you looked at one of these from a distance, you couldn't tell if it's a Napoleon or a 6-pounder or not. But when you get out on the battlefield and fire these things, this thing is significantly unimpressive compared to those Napoleons. Okay. So what's Robert E. Lee going to do about that? Robert E. Lee is going to melt these things down. Between now and Gettysburg, he's going to melt these things down, and he's only going to have one at Gettysburg. All the others have been melted down, and he's turned them into Napoleons. So at Gettysburg, he's going to have his Napoleon inventory had increased to 99 guns. So he melted down a bunch of these things. Looks like a Napoleon, but it's his little brother. Okay, it doesn't throw as big a punch. It's got a smaller diameter too, but if you get close enough to one of these things, it'll still do the job on it. Okay, you know. So let's see what we got next then. The other old Mexican warrior gun is a howitzer. Okay, now what's the difference between a howitzer and a gun? It's the difference between throwing a baseball and throwing a softball. Okay, I'm making a real general. When you throw a softball, how do you? It's sort of pitched like this, isn't it? So it kind of gets lobbed into the other guy's lines. You could sometimes, if the target's behind that hill there and it's close enough, you can fire a howitzer round, and it's got a different kind of trajectory than the other guns. The other guns are kind of straight, but the howitzers are a kind of gun that's more like throwing a softball. Okay, they have a very short range. Look at that, only 1,000 yards. You saw our guns over here that went up to 4,000 yards. Those rifle guns. These things don't go very far. Lee is not real happy with those, and he's going to start to melt some of those down too. But he still has quite a few at Gettysburg. Okay, next slide. Okay, there's other little bits and pieces of guns here at the battle. I'm not going to spend as much time on these because there's not all that many. There's a James rifle. Now this is where we'll get confused, because the James rifle, it looks like a smoothbore. What color are the smoothbores, folks? This first question on my quiz tonight. What color are the smoothbores? Green, okay. That's a green gun, but it's rifle. A guy named Mr. James tried to make a rifle gun out of a smoothbore, and that's what he created. The only problem is, and while he was testing it, after he manufactured a bunch of them, one of them blew up and killed him. So we stopped manufacturing James rifles and melted them down. Okay. 32-pound howitzers is just another bigger version of a 12-pounder. We had a few of those. Confederates had some howitzers, 24-pounders. These are Mexican War vintage things. And the Confederates had some Blakeleys, British guns. Now, all the guns that we're talking about tonight primarily are loaded from the front. By World War I, World War II, what do we have? We have the breech. Okay, we load them from the back. So the Confederates managed to bring in through the blockade some British-made Blakely guns with a loading from the rear. They're very, very effective. Problem is they couldn't get ammunition for them.
The numbers you're giving us, are they for Antietam or for the whole
army? These numbers you're seeing here?
The numbers or the numbers they have of each of these types of guns. Like that, you were giving us like we had 69 and they had 50.
That was at Antietam. That's just numbers for Antietam. Okay. Yeah. Okay, next slide. Okay, so 9 months later, what have the armies changed? Okay, on the 3-inch ordnance rifle, the U.S. Army had 87 at Antietam. They had 152 at Gettysburg. They were cranking them out, working. The Confederates had 44 at Antietam, and by Gettysburg they have 78. So they captured some more. They weren't making them yet. Okay, the 10-pound Parrott, we have about the same number, Confederates and the Federals, between Antietam and Gettysburg. The 20-pound Parrott, the U.S. is starting to kind of phase them out. There's a few left, but the Confederates have added some. Actually, they have 10. The big numbers, look at what the Confederates did with Napoleon's and what the Union did. The U.S. had 119. They added about 20 more cannons, but the Confederates tripled. quadrupled the number of Napoleons. That's the gun you want to have. 6-pound gun, pretty much gone. You know, we don't have any on the US side. Confederates down to 1. The Confederates still have some howitzers out there. Okay. I just wanted to show you this to show you how that evolves as the war moves on. That's part of Artillery 201, should you decide to invite me back next year. I don't know if you will be wanting to do that, but just a little plug on that. All right, next slide. All right, where are we building cannons? Where are we building cannons? Okay, let's talk about this. Would you advance it one piece here? So here's a Napoleon. Napoleon cost a whole $680 to build in the Civil War. That's a lot of money, isn't it? And we built 1,150 of them. Advance it one more, Alan. So this is where they made Napoleons. They had about 5 factories around the country that made Napoleons. Most of them were what? In Massachusetts, New England, but there's one in Cincinnati, Ohio. So look at how much a Napoleon cost. Next slide. 3-inch ordnance rifle, $350. Okay, it's a lot of money too. All right, we made 1,000 of these. This is for the whole war now. Okay, now let's see what that 10-pound parrot costs. Next slide. Okay, there's where we make the 3-inch ordnance rifles. One armory in Phoenix Iron Company. All right. Next slide. Next one. $190 to build a 10-pound parrot. You know why they are? That's why the Army's buying so many of these cheap yet somewhat dangerous and cannons. Okay, because they're cheap. You can make them fast. Okay. Just no commentary on that other than the fact that's how it worked. Okay. And one more advance, Alan, and we'll see where they make those at West Point. West Point. So that's where the U.S. Army is cranking out its cannons for the Civil War. Next slide. Okay. One final thing. This is basically the total number of cannons. Beginning of the war, the U.S. had 231 cannons. That's all. They purchased and issued those 2 numbers in the set. So they built 5,000 cannons in the Civil War. And we might say, well, when you look at World War II and the production of the United States and the industrial base, that's not a lot. But in those days, that's a significant number of artillery pieces that were built during the Civil War. That just speaks to the northern industrial base in the Civil War. Yes, sir. One more. That's a good question. It took about a week. The process that they had to go through. My understanding is about a week. Sure. You then ship them to an arsenal, and then when a new battery is being organized, you would write a requisition to the arsenal, ship me 6 Napoleons, and then we put the horses and the crews and everything together and we train them. But it does take a while to make the things and get them to the field. Okay, so we talked about cannons. Let's talk about how we move the cannons around.
I got a question about the Confederates.
Yes.
Where did they make their cannons other than the ones they stole?
They made a lot of their cannons in Richmond at the Tredegar Iron Works. Okay. There's not as much information that I've been able to find on other places, but there were a couple armories down in Alabama as well. But they try to duplicate the northern manufacturing process, but they don't have as much success because they have different machine tools and all that kind of stuff. So they don't do as well. But the Tredegar Iron Works was a big place in Richmond, which you can visit nowadays. Really cool place by the James River, right downtown Richmond.
The Cockman furnace, was that for the Revolutionary War or for the Civil War?
What's
the
that?
Cockman furnace?
Must have been Revolutionary War. I don't know about that place. True. All right, how do we move a cannon around? All right, so a cannon needs to have a limber attached to the cannon. That's like the trailer hitch. Okay, there's a little trailer hitch on this thing on the back side, on the right side, and that's where we attach the cannon. We attach the horses to the front side of it. Okay, so you have the horses, the limber chest, and then you have the cannon itself. And the muzzle is pointing that way. So there's 6 horses, the limber chest, which contains 1 ammo chest, ammunition, and then behind that is the cannon itself. But accompanying the cannon is going to be a caisson which is also attached to a limber. I'm gonna step away from the camera for just a second. Here you see the caisson, or you see the limber, and there's the caisson. That's where all your ammo is, okay? That's where all your ammunition is. So a limber and a caisson make up, yes,
I'm sorry, you may have said it, but were multiple forces used for each limber or depending on the size of the hand?
I understand. Your question is, that you're gonna have 6 horses on the limber and 6 more on the caissons. Am I understanding the
Well,
question?
yeah, you had said 6. I was wondering if just a couple of horses pulled a limber, I didn't hear the 6 the first time through.
Yeah.
I think we're good.
Yeah, okay. So this configuration is commanded by a sergeant. It's called a gun platoon. It's the cannon in limber and the caisson in another limber. That's a sergeant, 3-stripe that commands a gun platoon. We'll get more into this in a second. Next slide. So that ammo chest that I talked about, okay, sitting on that cannon, weighs 485 pounds. And do we have a forklift that's gonna lift that off and move it around? I'm asking rhetorically, right? No, these guys, when they're switching ammunition chests, are doing it the old fashioned way, okay? And the ammunition chest would have different kinds of ammunition. We'll talk about those in a minute. If you hit the advance one more time. Canister is a ammunition round that everybody likes to talk about because they think that that is the round that's used exclusively, because people writing letters or writing reports about artillery fire say, oh, there was all this grape and canister being fired. Probably not. It was probably something called spherical case, which we'll talk about in a minute. But I just wanted to show you this to give you an idea how much ammunition is in one of those ammunition chests, okay? So there's a limber with an ammunition chest right by the gun, and back here is the caisson and another limber with 3 more ammo chests. So 4 times 32 is 120, so no, I can't do math, very good at math. But that's how much ammunition I have for this cannon. When I use up these 4 ammo chests of artillery, what do I have to do? Move, get out, move back. Because the artillery supply guys are not gonna bring a wagon load of ammunition up to the front where it can be hit by artillery fire, right? So the guns have to move back. And a new battery has to replace it. That's usually how it works. Next slide. 4 kinds of cannonballs. There's 2 kinds of cannons, right? The green ones and the black ones. What are the green ones good for? Shorter range, shooting at infantry. What are the black ones good for? Longer range, shooting for artillery. I'm generalizing now. But now we have different kinds of ammunition, okay? We have got a little stink bug up here. He's riding my cannonball. You have this kind of shot. It's called a solid shot. It's just an iron ball. Just an iron ball. And it's got a bag of ammunition attached to it. When you shoot this, what do you use this for? You use this to knock over buildings. Or you use this to knock over columns of troops. So there's a line of troops advancing towards you. Or it could be a column of troops, 3 or 4 man front with a long line. They're going down a road, right? You're not on a line when you go down the road, you're in a column. So if your target is moving forward in a column, I use this because it'll hit the first 4 guys and then it keeps going back through the column, knocking out more troops, okay? That's a solid shot, okay? All right, so let's say the target up there has fleshed itself out into a line. Does a column, does one of these solid shots work as well? No, it's only going to knock out a couple guys and it's going to keep going. So now I have to turn this into an exploding shell. A shell that goes out a ways and explodes. Because now I can hit a whole bunch of guys that are advancing with an exploding shell. So the 2 middle shells, shell and spherical case, they're hollowed out, okay? They're hollowed out, and the shell is filled with gunpowder, and case shot fall. So a solid shot, or I'm sorry, a shell, when it goes out a distance and explodes, it breaks up into these ugly pieces of iron, okay? But it doesn't break up into a lot of them. It only breaks up into 4 or 5 big hunks of iron, but it's still pretty devastating, right? Would you agree? This is found near Antietam a few years ago. I did get permission to keep it. I'm not gonna go to jail for 2 years or $10,000 fine, because that's what happens if you don't follow the rules. So we could fire a shell at the enemy that's advancing on us, right? Agreed? Or you can fire a case shot. And a case shot is this one here. Look what's inside it. These things. These nasty little half-inch diameter iron balls for killing infantry, okay? So those shells are gonna go out of distance, and then they're gonna explode. They're gonna shower that advancing line with these things or that, okay?
How do they make it go?
What?
How do they make it
Explode.
explode? Yeah.
I can't, I'm an artillery guy, I can't do that.
I mean, obviously it has to explode at some point. What determines when it blows up?
Well, as you asked now, because I'm gonna tell you now. But let me finish up with canister. Canister is that next round on the end. Canister is just a tin can full of these things. 26 of these. It turns your cannon into a shotgun. All the other rounds so far have gone out a distance and exploded, right? The exploding shells in the middle, or the shot. This immediately, as soon as it comes out of the cannon, scatters these things, okay? And a good artilleryman will do what? He'll lower the muzzle of his cannon so that these not only are going out and striking a target, but they're ricocheting off the ground, throwing up rock, wood, dirt, whatever, to increase the number of hits that it can possibly get. So we, just like the cannons, we have 2 kinds of cannons, we got different kinds of artillery. So these young lieutenants and sergeants in the artillery know what's the best round to use in a given situation. So now we're going to get to Alan's question. Next slide. So these little cannonballs need a brain. They need a brain that tells them at a certain distance, I want you to explode, okay? At a certain distance, I want your cannonball to go out and explode, okay? If it's a short distance, it might be a 1 second fuse. If it's a longer range, it's 4 seconds or 5 seconds, okay? So the Army has developed the Worman fuse, which is not the only kind of fuse used, but an example of what is right here. Hit the return, Alan. See what's next. It looks like a little clock on the top. Okay, and it's got numbers from 1 to 5. That equates to seconds. 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, 5 second, and increments in between. 2.1, 2 1/4, 2 1/2, 2 3/4. That is the number of seconds that you're telling this little fuse to tell the cannon ball to explode. Now, how do we know that stuff? Next slide. This is the computer of the 19th century, ladies and gentlemen, right here, okay? This table of fire is attached to that limber chest where all the ammunition is in the back, okay? So I'm the platoon sergeant, okay? I'm the platoon sergeant. I see a target out there, okay? And it's an advancing line of infantry. And it's about 1,000 yards out, okay? So what I want to use is case shot. That's the one that fires those nasty iron balls. So hit the advance it once. So I'm going to say I want case shot and I want 960 yards. There's a case shot. See what it looks like? 960 yards. Next advance right there. So the gunner on the back opens the chest, picks up a case shot, He looks at this information, the boss wants it to go out 960 yards, hit it one more time. And another time. So we're gonna tell the gunner to elevate the cannon to 3 degrees. And we're gonna tell him to cut this fuse at 4 seconds, okay? Hit it one more time. One more time. Pop, we just punched a hole in the fuse. We drop it in the bag, and I'll tell you how this all works in a second, and that cannonball moves up to the front and is loaded, and if everything works, when you fire it, boom, in 4 seconds, it will explode 960 yards away. Yes,
Was obviously long before we had cell phones and people had little ear things in their ear. Okay, so how was the captain able to control saying when you want what used? How did they communicate? Because there was certainly noise, and how did anybody know? It wasn't like, I'm thinking about a football game, everybody.
oh yeah. It's very noisy, it's very quiet.
This.
The gun crew is relatively close to each other, okay? Sergeant and his gunners and the guys. Now, he is screaming his head off. But he would, for example, he'd be calling out case shot 900 yards. He's gonna call that back to the guys at the limber, and then he's gonna turn and say load to the guys up by the gun. So he's in the middle. But he is screaming his head off, okay, because of the noise, to your point, okay? Now, these captains and lieutenants and sergeants, by the second year of the Civil War, they're pretty well trained, okay? They've been doing this a lot. They've been practicing a lot. So I, as a lieutenant or captain, know that where the wood line is, just by experience, is 375 yards away or 300 yards away, just because he's been doing it for 2 years, okay? Since he joined the Army. So they are getting pretty good at doing that. The other thing is when you fire the round and it goes out and doesn't explode exactly where you want, you say, okay, we'll make a correction here, okay? So we might ignore the chart for whatever reason, okay? Yes?
They gauge the elevation of the gun because the gun isn't on flat ground. Did they have, what kind of things did they have?
They had a tool called a pendulum hawse, okay? I'm gonna get to this in a little bit, but on the back of the cannon is a little compass-like thing that hangs there, okay? And it's like a protractor, okay? So when he tells me that I elevate the cannon to 3 degrees, you adjust that little protractor thing and line it up at the top of the gun, and that'll get you to 3 degrees, okay? It's called a pendulum hawse. So that's how you would get your elevation. Remember, all this is happening while people are shooting at us. It's crazy. It's crazy. Okay, so now you all are experts on computing the elevation and the time of flight for an artillery. So just give yourselves a nice round of applause. All right, what's next? Next down. Yes.
Were all those charts predicated on a certain size load, because you had bags, certain sizes of charges that you could put in there?
Yes. Yes. The Napoleons and the smoothbores generally fired a 2.5 pound charge. The rifles fired a 1 pound charge. So they would come, and the bronze guns, the round is attached. The round is attached, okay? On the rifle guns, you put the powder in separately. You drop the powder bags in separately. So that's, but their standard is, it's a standard weight. It's 2.5 pounds or a pound. Okay, let's see where we are. All right, canister is a very interesting, nasty charge. That's turning your cannon into a shotgun. So here's a cannon, okay, and there's a line of troops approaching. You see these little dotted lines, maybe you can't see them from there. So we're gonna fire a canister round and see what happens to these troops, okay? So if you can advance it once, boom, that canister round comes out and it will, at 100 yards, it's gonna spread 11 yards. So 22 to 33 yards. And in that kill zone, if the soldiers are marching by the book, there's gonna be 44 soldiers in that kill zone, and 7 of those shots are gonna hit. So that means at a range of 100 yards, you could take out 18 guys with one cannonball. Okay, so now the cannonball goes further up, hit it again. Now at 300 yards, it spreads, okay, it spreads. And now in the width of the fire is 25 yards, there's 100 men in that kill zone. The number is starting to go down, but it's still pretty significant. 18% of the soldiers are hit at that range. And one final time, at 150 yards, it really is spread out. I'm sorry, 600 yards. Canisters really only go out to 300 yards. Then it's too far widely dissipated to be any good. But I just want to show you the impact of what canister can do. And if I'm an artillery guy and you're advancing towards me and you hear me holler canister, what's your inclination? Hit the ground, right? And even worse if I say double canister, because I want to put 2 of those cans in there.
How many shots were in one of the canisters?
Hmm?
How many shots were, the
26 iron balls in one can. 52 if you put 2 of them in there. Next slide. Artillery horses. Okay, that's just an introductory slide. Next slide. In the US in 1860, there were 7 million horses. Okay. 3 million go in the army. 260,000 are artillery horses. 184,000 are in the US Army and 77,000 in the Confederate Army. Probably half of those horses die. Okay, don't have the exact statistics, but half of those horses die. They're just used up. They're just used. Did they have a choice in the matter? Did the soldiers volunteer or they're drafted? These horses don't have a choice. Of the casualties in horses, like Civil War soldiers, most of the deaths are what? In disease. 48% die of disease, 30% are just worn out. And only 22% are combat casualties. Next slide. So when you take your horses and put them with the cannon and limbers, this is what it would look like. Up on the top, you see a gun and a limber, and then you see 3 pair of horses. See the wheel pair, the swing pair, and the lead pair. Each pair is basically custom made, shall I say? If I have a herd of horses out here and I come up to the stable and this is a bunch of new horses, I'm going to look for horses that look like they want to be in charge. Because some horses more or less want to be in charge. So you 2 horses are the lead team. Okay? Most of us, me included, just want to go along and stay out of trouble and we'll do whatever they tell us. We put them in the swing team, okay, in the middle, okay? They'll just follow wherever you tell them to go. The big brutes, the big heavy ones who got to get this limber and this caisson moving, inertia is right, science, inertia. You want the big brutes horses to be the wheel pair, okay? So leaders, swing pair, and wheel pair would be how they would set those horses up. Okay? And heaven forbid, once you put a horse in a position, don't move them around. They're like us. We work in that cubicle down in TC for 30 years in the same corner. We've got the window space, and some new boss comes in and wants you to move over here. Oh, no, I'm not doing that. That's how horses are, too. Okay. Next slide. Okay, that is a horse battery. That is a battery that's got 200 horses. Okay, look, everybody's got a horse. And how much food does a horse need? Next slide. Well, I don't have it on a slide, so I'll tell you. So each horse needs 26 pounds of food a day. And 4 gallons of water a day. So if you got 100 horses in your battery, everyone here can do the math, right? 100 times 26 pounds, that's 2,600 pounds of food every day for your battery. And at Antietam, there's 115 batteries out there. Just think of all the food that these horses consume and all the water. Not only you got 26 pounds going in, but you got 26 pounds that you gotta take care of in that. Okay. Well, the quartermaster department is supposed to provide the food, but they don't always do it successfully. You don't always get the right amount of food every day. So your horses sicken. They get diseases, they die of exhaustion. So you're constantly replenishing your horses when that happens. Next slide. We're running out of time. We gotta move on. All right, there's our gun crew. There are 7 guys, 8 guys in the gun crew. Okay, and we'll start in the back, gunners 6 and 7 back there. They are the ones who have that computer on the back of the limber chest. They are the ones who take this round, and if it needs a fuse, they put the fuse in it and get it ready. They drop it in a bag, a leather bag, and give it to number 5 there. See number 5? Number 5 is going to bring it up to number 2, and number 2 will take the round out and load it in the gun. He'll just put it in the front of the gun, and gunner number 1 will push it back to the back of the gun right there. So now the round is back there. There's a powder charge that goes in first. So now what we got to do is we got to poke a hole in the powder charge. So here is a tool called a vent pick, and at the back of the gun, I'm going to poke a hole in that powder bag. What am I doing? I'm exposing the powder, right? I'm exposing the powder in that powder bag. So the powder needs to be out there so we can explode it. So what we do now is we put in like a firecracker. It's called a friction primer. Okay. So we poke the hole in the powder bag. We put that in. Okay. And now gunner number 4 here is the lucky guy that gets to pull the lanyard. Okay. So gunner number 4 is standing over here. And now we hook. We hook that up. And now you watch me. I'm the sergeant. And when I raise my sword up and drop it and say, notice you didn't hear me say fire, did you? Because it's so loud out, right? So there has to be a visual as well as an audio. So you can see it and hear it. So when I say fire, and I drop my sword or hand, you're gonna pull this lanyard, and it's going to, you pull it out. This thing's gonna explode and punch out the powder. Fire the gun. Okay. Remember, we're being shot at. Okay. We can't hear a thing. We're already deaf because we've been in the Army for a year and can't hear anyway. Okay. So the environment out here is very, very dangerous.
Is there a spark that occurs?
Yes, when you pull this little wire tab off, it creates a spark which goes into the powder bag and causes it. Okay, so I'm gonna say that you all passed the Artillery 101 training tonight. Okay. I want to read a final quote about what it takes to be an artillery soldier. Okay, we'll just leave it at this one right here.
Stop it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of other slides that we just want to stay in our time frame here, so you can close it up. But think about this. This is what somebody has to have on their mind when they're firing a cannon, when it's a lieutenant or a young sergeant. Okay. Inaction is when the artillery officer must display his fitness for duty. Inaction. If at such a time, amid the noise of his own cannons, right, the tearing and bursting of the enemy's shot, firing all over us, the plunging of frightened and injured horses, and the embarrassment of dead ones. See, these horses are getting killed too, just like the men. And the horses make a hideous sound when they are dying. And the blinding smoke and general uproar. If he can do all this amid all that noise and terror, he can preserve all his faculties unimpaired. He still has his wits about him, and remembers all these principles involved in the management of his guns. You know, all the stuff we talked about tonight. So as to direct the range and shot to be used And watch over the men to see that in their excitement, they do not make any mistakes of a fatal nature. You're around a 1-ton cannon that's got a 2.5 pound charge and a 12-pound round in there. You want to make sure that your men are safe and being taken care of. If he can do all those things, he will have accomplished the highest qualifications of an artillery officer. It's been a pleasure speaking with you tonight. Thank you very much. We'll have a few questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, I fought in the Centennial. I think it'd be interesting for these people to know what happens when a round doesn't go off.
Oh, yeah. So you're talking about a misfire.
Yeah,
Okay. So with a misfire, there's a very structured approach to approaching that artillery piece. So if there's a misfire, what happens is you wait 30 seconds, you pull the lanyard and nothing happens, right? So what you have to do is let the gun cook for 30 seconds. Maybe it'll go off, you know, you don't put anybody near the gun, you step away. After 30 seconds, you pull out that friction primer and put a new one in. Okay, and you go through the loading process again. Maybe the friction primer was bad, okay? And more times than not, 99% of the time, when you do that and pull the lanyard, it goes off. But 1% of the time when it doesn't go off, then you have to flood the bore with water. You have to soak that thing down and wet down that powder so that it won't go off. But you're not huddling around the cannon either, especially the rear of the cannon, because what I didn't mention to you is when this cannon goes off, it jumps back 4, 5, 6 feet. So you don't want to have your feet, you don't want to be standing in front of the wheel there. You know what's going to happen, right? So basically that's the misfire process. Is first you try to fire it one more time, put another friction primer in with the fire. That doesn't work the second time, then you go through a much more elaborate process. And now they have CO2 bottles that you would use, you get them in the back there and try to blow that round up. But that's a very dangerous situation when these cannons.
they had to reach in sometimes and grab that round and pull it back out.
There's a thing called a worm, yeah. You put it in there and you kind of screw it into the round and bring it out. But again, you're gonna wait quite a while to do that before, till you're convinced that that round is pretty well soaked with water and that friction primer can't go off. Any other questions?
In World War II, they had cannons. They didn't have much of a problem with explosions like that, did they?
I don't think so. I don't know as much about World War II artillery than I do about this era of time, but I don't think it was as big a concern. But of course, like to the gentleman's point, you have a drill for any contingency. Or if that round doesn't go off, what is it that a World War II artilleryman does? Probably in a lot of ways similar to the Civil War. What is you wait, you check it, make sure, maybe put another friction primer or whatever they call in the Civil War in, and you try to get it to go off that way. But I'm sure there were issues with that. Yes, sir.
What was your process of research as you came up with this?
Well, this was the second book in the Antietam Institute's library. The first one was the brigades. So a bunch of us split up all the infantry brigades at Antietam, and like I wrote a few, somebody else wrote a few, blah, blah, blah. But we wanted to put the artillery in its own book. And I basically volunteered to write the book, which was a massive undertaking. And the first step was to just get as much information as I could. And so any battery histories that were out there, I bought them and created a library. I was at the Archives and Library of Congress a lot, looking at records that they had there for it. There was a lot there is in the Antietam story, there's a guy named Ezra Carman. I don't know if anyone's heard of him. Ezra Carman is the original compiler of information about the Battle of Antietam. And he was at the battle, he fought there. And afterwards, he was hired by the War Department to become the historian. So what he did is he wrote letters to anybody that he could think of that was there, Confederate and Union. privates, colonels, generals, letters go out with a mimeographed map of the field. Didn't show where any units were, and he said, please, would you please come back to me and tell me where you were, who, what, when, where, and mark it up on these maps, okay? So the maps are one thing, but in addition to exactly answering Carmen's questions, a lot of these guys put a lot of details in about what they did, okay, what their battery did, which has never been published. And so I was fortunate to work with Tom Clemens, who is the author of the Carmen manuals, and get letters from artillerymen to add sort of a richness to it, not just the dry, we fired at 800 yards, 25 rounds, stories of the men. So I put that all together, and it's more of a reference book. In other words, it's not when you read cover to cover, but if you want to learn about, say, Rock Ridge Artillery, Robert E. Lee's son was, there's a chapter on that battalion. Someday I'll take all these separate stovepipes of information on batteries and weave it into the actual story. I have a project right now where I'm adding an atlas, an artillery atlas, as a companion to this book, which will hopefully be out sometime this year. Nice big color maps made out of paper that you can roll up and stick in your back pocket if you're tromping around the battlefield, with more of the details. But it took me about, actually it started in 2014. I started researching. I was going to do something else, not specifically on all the artillery, but just the regulars, the US Army units. And then when the Antietam Institute stood up and we wanted this book to be written, so I wrote that. Thanks. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the armies had a tremendous number of horses.
Yes.
Where did the horses come from? Well, they weren't drafted, I'm sure.
They didn't have a choice. The quartermaster department went out and bought them. They would buy horses.
Buying from where? From farmers?
Farmers or horse traders or things like that, you know. But if in a pinch, you would steal, you know. You would take the local farmers' horses if your horses were, you know, in bad shape, and replace them that way. The Confederates did that more often, but the U.S. Army Quartermaster Department had a very detailed procurement process for buying horses. You know, I don't have it with me, but they had to be a certain height. They had to have a certain width of shoulders. You know, artillery horses are different than horses hauling a wagon or cavalry. They have to wear these very complex harnesses because there's all these different actions when the horse moves that affects how that limber moves. So an artillery harness is a very complicated harness. And he wanted some horses that were pretty smart too, you know. There wasn't any particular breed that they used anything they used.
Did they use a lot of draft horses?
They did, yeah. They not only had the guns to pull, they had wagons and artillery, yeah.
When was the last war they were actually using horses to pull guns?
Say that again.
When was the last war that they were actually using horses? Was it in the beginning of World War I?
Germans used them in World War II. The German army had, most of its artillery was pulled by horses. I think we were phasing it out by then. But there were probably other European armies that had horse-drawn artillery. Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.